Meeting is being called to order, the study session for the leaf blowers. We're going to be calling roll.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Przynski.
Here.
Vice Mayor Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Steve Leonardis.
Here. So this is the study session. We have a staff report being provided by Christina Gilmore. I would like to, at this time, remind the audience to turn off your cell phones, put them on silent, and if you would like to speak on the subject, please fill out a speaker card. Ms. Gilmore, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Christina Gilmore, Assistant to the Town Manager. I'd like to advise the Council that a desk item was distributed this afternoon on the study session item. The purpose of this evening's study session is to receive Council direction on the regulation of leaf blowers. In July of 2012, the town adopted their sustainability plan, and included in that sustainability plan was the recommendation of a possible adoption of a leaf blower ordinance in order to meet the town's greenhouse gas reduction emissions. In August of 2013, a study session was held on this topic. At the conclusion of the study session, Council asked staff to return at a later date with the following additional information: a survey of cities with existing leaf blower ordinances in place, providing recommendations to regulate leaf blower use in residential and commercial zones, and provide recommendations on educational and leaf blower exchange options. Staff surveyed the following cities that currently have leaf blower bans in effect. Those cities include the city of Los Altos, the city of Palo Alto, the city of Beverly Hills, and the city of Santa Monica. A summary of the survey is included in the staff report. And to summarize the survey, it is found that of all the cities that currently have a leaf blower in place, some of the cities limit types of leaf blowers used in residential areas. There are varying degrees of public outreach and education, and there is low priority complaint-based enforcement. Based on the information provided within the staff report, staff makes the following recommendations for proposed leaf blower regulations for council consideration. Join with other local agencies in supporting a Bay Area leaf blower exchange program and spare the air day leaf blower restrictions. In residential zones, prohibit gas-powered leaf blowers or prohibit leaf blowers over 65 decibels. Direct staff to include notice of pending regulations to gardeners, landscapers, or related business license holders or permittees. Direct staff to limit the first 6 months of enforcement to warning notices or letters issued by police or community development as complaints are received. Alternatives to the recommendations presented include making no changes to the current ordinance, reducing the hours and/or days for use of leaf blowers in residential and/or commercial areas, prohibiting the use of gas-powered leaf blowers in commercial areas, and prohibiting the use of leaf blowers that emit 65 decibels or more in commercial areas. And then last, prohibit the use of all leaf blowers in residential and/or commercial areas. This concludes the presentation, and I'm available to answer your questions.
Questions of staff. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 or 3, if that's okay. I'll do them all at once. Thank you. I was curious why staff is not recommending moving ahead with having some regulation on commercial and public spaces because of our town being so integrated and with residential and commercial that would seem to me to be something we should do right off the bat to be consistent.
So the thought behind the list of recommendations presented tonight is so that we could roll out a set of recommendations to regulate leaf blowers on a voluntary basis in residential zones, because it seems that the majority of the complaints we receive to the town about leaf blower use is happening in residential zones. So we felt that limiting leaf blower use in the residential zones on a 6-month basis to see how that works, and having a voluntary compliance for gardeners and landscapers, and giving staff time to assess the type of enforcement is needed to ensure that the voluntary compliance is followed. So we are recommending that we target residential zones first, and then in a 6-month time period, come back with a report on how that voluntary regulation and compliance is going, and then look at the commercial and public spaces with the possibility of regulating leaf blower use in those areas.
So when you say voluntary, you mean we would not actually have an ordinance prohibiting? Or we would have an ordinance prohibiting, but the voluntary part would be, we want you to do it and we won't penalize you if you don't?
Correct. So we would be, depending upon the council direction tonight, the ordinance would be revised to put in the regulations for leaf blowers in residential zones, and the voluntary compliance would be that the gardeners or landscapers, if they're found to be out of compliance, would receive warning letters or citations, and they wouldn't be fined for the first 6 months. So it would be an education process on behalf of our code enforcement or police department.
So if my other questions get more into methodology. So I'm struggling with the practicality of how the town would do outreach and educate and I'll just say gardeners. Homeowners we can put our hands on, but the gardening services are in and out. So how would you be able to actually get in touch with these folks, make them aware of it, and then monitor to see if they're voluntarily complying? It seems like, I shouldn't, go ahead. How would you do that? I don't understand.
Well, one option, and of course we haven't explored all of the options for the outreach yet, but one option off the top of my head is to notify all residents within the town of the regulations that the council would adopt. And if they have gardeners or landscapers that use leaf blowers, provide informational flyers to the residents that they can give to their gardeners and leaf blowers, letting them know of the new regulations and the compliance that is involved with the regulations. And then as far as complaints, we would set up an email or a phone line to code enforcement or police PD for people to call in complaints, and they would need to provide the address that the violation was occurring, and then our code enforcement police department could follow up with the homeowner.
And if I might add, we would also use the business license database to the extent possible to reach those gardeners and landscapers or other related businesses who have obtained their business license and paid that tax. So we would do that outreach. In terms of bringing the ordinance back for council approval, that would be another opportunity for public education and communication. But because of the challenge of that is why we did see the first 6 months not so much as a voluntary compliance, but as a soft enforcement, where it would be warning letters and notices as we get complaints to the gardeners, homeowners, landscapers, and others who are violating the ordinance before the fines would go into effect after 6 months. So I think that would be the set of outreach that we would attempt to use.
Okay, I'm down to my last 2 questions. When we get around to actual penalties, does it go to the property owner or to the person who's actually using equipment that has been banned?
In the cities that I've surveyed that currently have bans in place, it appears that the penalty or the fines are applied against the operator. So that is an option that the town could take if the council so chooses, if the council decides to apply the penalty to the homeowner. That is up to the council's discretion.
And then my last question right now is on the enforcement. The numbers on the other towns that you surveyed were quite varied, but they skewed towards the heavy side, from 5 to 10 a day, I believe, 300 and some to 400 and some a year. Do we have that many resources sitting around doing nothing that we can allocate to leaf blower enforcement?
It would be a burden. We've been increasing our code enforcement staffing, and I think we took some solace in what we learned from the other jurisdictions, the survey, that it's relatively low priority enforcement. So if there are higher priority issues, those would be addressed first. I think we also want to use the first 6 months to see the level of complaints that are coming in and how much we're able to move to self-compliance through an education process rather than having to go out and start citing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also have several questions, if I might.
Yes.
On the issue of spare the air days, I noticed that staff's recommendation is no use of the blowers on summer spare the air days, and I was just curious as to why you limited it to summer and did not include winter.
I did the research on the Air Quality Management District's website. They have two categories of spare the air days: winter spare the air days and summer spare the air days. The winter spare the air days seem to be focused mostly on wood smoke, reducing wood smoke and wood burning activity. And the summer spare the air days seem to be focused mainly on transportation reduction, as well as gasoline consumption from devices such as leaf blowers. So that was why the staff made the recommendation for summer spare the air days. Of course, if the council would like to revise that recommendation, you certainly can do that.
On that same subject, I note that on page 1 of your staff report, you combine the exchange and spare the air with working with the Bay Area. But then later on in your staff report, you separate out the spare the air, something that we, the town, could do independently. So where do you see, what is your recommendation in that regard?
Well, the council did express interest at the last study session to explore opportunities to incorporate spare the air day notices into any future types of leaf blower regulation. Since the study session in August, we've become aware of other neighboring cities who are also looking into leaf blower regulations, such as the city of San Jose, as noted in the staff report. One of their recommendations that they will like their council to review and prioritize is the possibility of partnering with other Bay Area agencies to come up with education programs as well as exchange programs to limit the use of leaf blowers or to promote alternative uses. So we combined them in the recommendation, noting that there might be several avenues at the same time, that courses that we could pursue.
And I would just add, it goes back to the enforcement issue. I think the town could separately have its regulation in the ordinance, but the effectiveness of the regulation in terms of getting to self-compliance would be much, much greater if it's a Bay Area-wide endeavor, and that when spare the air day alerts are made, it says not only reduce your vehicle miles, but reduce your leaf blower and other gasoline vehicle. We will be much more effective in that regulatory approach with a broader set of partners.
All right, thank you. And then lastly, this is informational for me. You have the decibel levels of the gas leaf blowers in your report, but I don't recall if you had the decibel level of the electric. Do you know what it is?
So leaf blowers, either gasoline or electric, come in varying decibel levels. So for cities who have adopted leaf blower ordinances, especially where noise is a concern, it seems that 65 decibels or lower are an acceptable amount of decibel levels to be emitted while running leaf blowers, regardless if they're gas or electric. So we set the threshold at 65 for a conversation for the council. Of course, if the council decides to amend that recommendation, they can do so. But in the tests that have been run on leaf blowers, it seems that the 65 decibel blower, regardless of whether it's an electric or gas, seems to be emit less noise than, say, a 90 decibel leaf blower.
All right, Mr. Mayor, that's it. Thank you.
Further questions, Councilmember Brzezinski?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the recommendations was to support the Bay Area Leaf Blower Exchange Program. What is the mechanism that program entails, and what is the consequence, if any, to the town financially?
So currently, there is not a Bay Area leaf blower exchange program. If you recall from the August study session, there's a South Coast Air Quality Management District in Southern California that currently has a leaf blower exchange program that they run every year, and it's been a very highly successful program. And the recommendation at that time was or the direction from the council at that time after that study session was for staff to explore options for approaching the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to see if they could work with cities in the Bay Area to prioritize a leaf blower exchange program. So I know that the city of San Jose has expressed an interest in looking into this type of a program. The city of San Mateo previously earlier this year had expressed an interest. And so in reaching out to the Air Quality District earlier this year, they had indicated that they are aware of these types of programs in other regions, though it wasn't a high priority. So staff's recommendation was if council would like to move forward with this recommendation, that possibly the town of Los Gatos work with other local jurisdictions to see if they can't combine their efforts to encourage the Air Quality District to implement this type of a program. And as referring to cost, I'm not quite sure. I couldn't tell you exactly what the cost would be to the town at this point. We would have to have further discussions with the Air Quality District and do some analysis. But off the top of my head, I recall from the August study session, the South Coast Air Quality District allocated several hundreds of $1,000s a year, so maybe like $250,000 to $300,000 a year for their leaf blower exchange program, and they were very successful in doing the exchanges. And the gardeners and landscapers who participate in the exchange were able to get a significant cost discount on those types of leaf blowers, I think up to even $200 per device. So it's a win-win for the South Coast Air Quality District and those cities and counties in that region, and it's a win-win for the landscapers and gardeners who operate businesses in that area.
Go ahead.
I think when is relative depending on how much money you have to spend on this too, though.
That's true.
Okay. How far along is San Jose in its evaluation of its own program?
I believe a recommendation to the Rules Committee was just submitted within the last few weeks, and it was asked that it be prioritized at their next council priority setting session. So we have not talked to staff directly, but we will follow up with San Jose to see where they are in prioritizing this and actually moving forward with any of the recommendations that were submitted.
Okay. One last comment. I think in our last session, the Air Board was characterized as seeing this as a low priority versus automobile emissions and wood burning, and that therefore it may not be completely supportive of the efforts made.
That is
Could
our
you
understanding.
revise us on that?
Yeah, that is still our understanding, that leaf blowers are a low priority for the Air Quality District, but with several Bay Area jurisdictions who are interested in limiting the use of leaf blowers or restricting the use of leaf blowers, having a group of cities approach the Air District may have a little bit more weight than one individual city approaching them.
All right, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Ms. Gilmore, thank you for your report, and thank you for looking at the other jurisdictions. I appreciate, because I know I was one of the people that asked for it. Just following up on Councilmember Brzezinski's question regarding the Air Quality District, what you're proposing now is that the council gave you a direction to pursue that would be basically a lobbying effort. That would be then a regional exchange program.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions? Seeing none, I just have a couple myself. I noticed that in the report, some of the other jurisdictions limited the hours. Currently, our hours are 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 7 days a week. Is that correct? Or-
Correct.
Okay, and that includes holidays. And some of the other jurisdictions were 9 to 5, and then on holidays there was no use, Sundays no use. It varied. But why did we not see any recommendations like those in our staff report to limit the hours of use?
Those recommendations are included in the alternatives. Is the last slide. So if the council would like to review any of the alternatives and direct staff to follow through on some of the alternatives that were recommended, we are willing to do so.
Yes, and just to clarify, the current restrictions are 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekdays and 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. on weekends and holidays, and that's only in residential and noise-sensitive areas currently. And the option remains to shorten those hours, to apply them to commercial areas. We thought the primary focus of the other jurisdictions and what we learned from them was not so much controlling the hours and days, but controlling the type of equipment that either causes noise or pollutants.
And one other question I have. What, I didn't notice anything in the report recommending our own staff, their use of two-cycle leaf blowers perhaps being limited or eliminated altogether in favor of an alternative, or the contractors that we hire to do some of our landscaping and maintenance. So I was just curious why we didn't look at those types of things in this report.
Yeah, so as stated earlier during this discussion, we chose to focus our recommendations on the residential zones for the first 6 months to get a handle on the number of complaints, to see if limiting the type of blowers or the decibel blowers helps to alleviate some of the concerns and the problems that the residents who have contacted us have complained about. At the conclusion of the 6 months, we will do a reevaluation and assessment of the residential regulation, and we would consider revising commercial zones as well as public spaces, and that would include town operations.
And just to clarify, commercial, industrial, and public spaces are currently not regulated, so that was another part of our focus on the residential. It's only in the residential zones. We have the time limits, and we're proposing to extend equipment limits in there as well, based on your prior discussion, and then come back to look at extending time limits and or equipment limits in commercial, industrial, and public spaces.
So a follow-up question, would we have any authority over the school districts? Would that be included in that commercial/public spaces?
Interesting question. Obviously, their land use authority is separate from the town. I'm not sure their operating authority or not. We can investigate that and include that in that subsequent study with the town.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I had a follow-up because I noticed it in our report, and then it was mentioned again. In our report on page 2, it's talking about, quote, noise-sensitive zones, unquote, or areas. What is that? What's a noise-sensitive area, and is it defined somewhere in our codes?
I can't expand more on the noise-sensitive zone. This is quoted directly from our current ordinance. I would assume, and just in reading the language, because the language is verbatim, that they are referring to mostly residential zones or residential areas that maybe abut commercial, but we would have to go back to the ordinance to review the definitions to make sure that we understood exactly what it was referring to.
Seeing no further questions, does any member of the public wish to speak on this item this evening? You have 3 minutes. Please come forward and fill out a speaker card. Please tell us your name and your address.
My name is Martin Stuzinski. I'm a resident of San Jose, 5117 Esther Drive. I live on the Los Gatos, San Jose border. Excuse me. My throat's a little dry. I'm working to ban gas leaf blowers in San Jose. And I've been working with a couple of the council members in San Jose, Ash Kalra and Donald Rocha, and those two council members are sort of spearheading the move in San Jose. I've also started an online petition on moveon.org. If you're curious, you can look it up. Just search ban leaf blower San Jose, and you'll see over 320 residents have signed this petition, and many of them have left remarks regarding how the noise and air pollution, especially from two-cycle leaf blowers, affect their lives. It's a quality of life issue, and it's also an air pollution issue. What you really need to understand is how these two-cycle motors differ from four-cycle motors. The two-cycle motors are highly air polluting. They burn a gas-oil mix. They lack valves. They're built light, and that's why they sacrifice the valve train. But the downside is they're highly air polluting, so much so that two-cycle motorcycles and other motor vehicles have been banned from our roads since the late 1970s. And somehow these leaf blowers using two-cycle motors have escaped any legislative action. So I'd like to emphasize that. So personally, I would highly recommend that you ban the two-cycle gas leaf blowers, as well as there's a tiny percentage of four-cycle leaf blowers out there, but I would recommend a total ban on all gas leaf blowers.
Thank you. Is there questions for the speaker? Seeing none. Anybody else would like to come forward and speak on this topic? Seeing none, that officially closes the public hearing. We'll move on to council for comments, direction, etc. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I can tell you I have perhaps a little bit different view on this. So my highest priorities are things not on your list of recommendations. So my highest priorities would be limiting the hours on commercial and activity on commercial and public spaces. And given you ask about school districts, and I know from my experience with the high school that we have no control over the level of their PA system, apparently. So that's a noise issue. So I have a feeling we can't control their leaf blowers either. But the public spaces that we can control and commercial. And then secondly, reducing the number of hours/days that it's an allowable activity. And in particular, I would appreciate it eliminating it on Sundays and holidays, and maybe reducing some of the other hours. I'd be open to whatever anybody wants to suggest. In terms of the actual ban on the blowers, I really have a problem with setting up an ordinance that I think is going to be pretty close to impossible to communicate effectively to everyone who comes into town, services our residents, and leaves very quickly. And I don't think that we have the bandwidth on staff and resources to do any kind of really proper enforcement if we went in that direction. So I'm not inclined to like to put into place a law that can't be enforced and or even properly communicated. And so I'm really hesitant to move in that direction because I don't think it's going to be effective. It'll be a nice little environmental plus for the town. You can check off, yes, we did that, and aren't we green? But in terms of actual impact and effectiveness, I don't think it's going to be there, and it won't pencil out, as it were, the investment of town resources versus the actual bottom line results of reducing either noise or the air pollution. So that's where I am.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councilwoman McNutt regarding limitation of hours and days. I think that makes sense. I think because so many areas that are in the town are basically commercial/residential, that I don't think it makes sense to cut out residential because the people that live next to commercial are impacted by the leaf blowers. So if we're going to do something, we should do it. I think that's the same for public spaces and staff, because if we're going to put regulations in place, we should apply them to ourselves. I differ from Councilwoman McNutt because I have faith in people's ability to follow the law. And I think if we put regulations in place, that's why we have a 6-month grace period, if you will, to educate people, have them have the ability to get it moving. I think it's been successfully in place in other jurisdictions. Thank you for that information. I support banning the gas leaf blowers, or at least the 2-stroke engines. I support a limitation on decibels. I support a lobbying effort to participate in an exchange program. And that's pretty much where I am on it.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I get to go through all my notes of what Ms. McNutt and Ms. Jensen said. I agree that we should include commercial areas and public spaces, especially since we received a letter, I think someone on Almendra, and the commercial area was right there, and so for them it was a distinction without a difference if we didn't prohibit commercial areas. We have a small town. So I agree with that. I think that we should do limit hours and days and prohibit Sundays and holidays. Looking at, now that's Ms. McNutt. Now we go to Ms. Jensen. I believe that we should support the exchange program, understanding that it might not be immediately linear result. If you move along with San Jose and other jurisdictions, you're just trending in the right direction. I believe that we should include Spare the Air days. I understand that it's just summer for now, and I did, also factor in, that why we're not doing it in the winter. I think we should have nothing over 65 decibels. We should not have gas-powered leaf blowers. I think the 6-month grace period, or educational period, I guess it would be, that staff is recommending is a good idea. With regard to enforcement, there are a lot of things that you don't know how they're going to get enforced in a jurisdiction in our town, but you look at the other cities that have enacted these ordinances, and I thought the report on what they did was very good, so thank you for that. I found that very helpful. And the number of complaints they had and how they dealt with it, some were dealing with it immediately, some not so immediately, but they were again trending in the right direction. I believe those are all of the issues, and then waiting for 6 months and returning the subject matter to us in 6 months, I think is a very good idea.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I tend not to want to appear to be the nanny state, and this is a nuisance. I don't think this is a real question of public safety, and yet we're going to have our public safety folks out there doing the enforcement. What I read in the analysis of the 4 cities, 2 of which are in our county, in terms of their enforcement, it's not an easy thing. It's lowest priority in terms of police response, and we have some difficulty in maintaining code compliance at this time anyway. So that's a real hesitation. I don't really think it's appropriate for us to create law that we can't enforce. However, I do believe that there's merit to what we're looking at here in terms of some kinds of constraints. As far as the Bay Area Leaf Blower Exchange Program, I certainly wouldn't do it unilaterally. I certainly wouldn't contribute hundreds of thousands of dollars to make that happen. I think that is really counterintuitive given where our resources must be expended. But I think it's interesting for us to explore that as an option for those individuals who may be encouraged to to become more environmentally sound in the type of machine that they use to do their business. But that to me would be up for investigation, but only on a regional level as far as I'm concerned. As far as residential versus commercial, I don't see a distinction. I think that all of our community is noise and pollution sensitive, and I do agree that the differentiation of residential from commercial is not so clear that we can make that isolation. I actually would think it would be easier to get commercial compliance, because these are the people who we have business licenses on. These are the people who are doing business in town. We have conditional use permits for so many of them. They should be more than interested in participating in our programs that would enhance the environment. So, and to me, that is not a distinction I would want to make. I'd want to be inclusive of both. I think that if we're talking about noise, 65 decibels is kind of a standard. I would not want us to try to adjust that. And of course, that demands that then we're able to monitor it or measure it in some way. In reading through the various city responses, typically what we saw was as a low priority response for law enforcement. By the time the officer got to the site, the event had terminated and they were off about their business someplace else. So for me, it really is more a matter of community education and the necessity of our outreaching to our people, because I do think we have a very environmentally oriented community, and I do think with some education and some sensitivity, I frankly would think it'd be beneficial in the long run for us to self-monitor and to raise the issue of timing, for example. Once we start to say you can't do it before this hour and you can't do it after that hour, and it's constrained from the times we have right now, or we're isolating it away from Sundays and holidays, I think the message gets communicated, you do this sparingly, and because of that, I think we'll get a greater compliance. So I would definitely be in favor of restricting hours and days. And then the 6-month enforcement period with warnings, I think that would be necessary and appropriate, and to do a re-evaluation at that time, particularly to hear from our enforcement folks what their experience was, okay? Because that's the boots on the ground that would be able to tell us what kinds of interactions they had with people, what were people reacting to, and I think that if we do this, then we can have a definite impact on how this is affecting the community. But I would like to reiterate that we continue to monitor San Jose in particular, and the types of ordinance language or restrictions that they're imposing, because they're the big dog in the county. And I think we've seen it with the plastic bag ordinances. You go from one jurisdiction to the next when you have this inconsistency. And not only is it confusing, it also has impacts on the business community. So to me, it would be very important to be in sync with San Jose.
All right, so how do I feel about it? I agree with the spare the air days, no use. As far as gas-powered leaf blowers, I think there are alternatives to those. We have electric. I think they have natural gas blowers now, which have gained efficiency and power. I agree with the 6-month window to the grace period. I think we should put all the public and private spaces in at this time so we don't have to hear this again. Above 65 decibels should be out. Limit the hours, I agree with. I think this was pretty much across the board. Limit the hours, and on holidays and Sundays, have no use. I would like to get more information on the exchange program to see what the price is of that. I'm not really concerned about the enforcement aspect. I think if you notify the residents like the city of Santa Monica did, they put the responsibility on the homeowners to tell their gardeners or whatever to what to do. So I think you know, people will do the right thing when they're told to do the right thing most of the time. Where else? The only other concern I had is people with large parcels, and we live in the hillsides and things like that in Los Gatos, and there may be applications where certain non-gas leaf blowers may not be applicable, so I might want to see some policy or ideas on what do you do when somebody's got a 2-acre lot. But I really do feel like that would be the exception and not the norm. I really feel like there are alternatives with electric and natural gas that would probably meet most needs, or a good old-fashioned rake and a broom. What did we do without them in 1975? This, to me, is, you know, it may not be a priority for the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, but to me, it's a quality of life issue. The cities in our report are all cities that have very high quality of lives and for the residents, and I look at those, and I would like to look at being part of that group for our residents. This is a subject that I think comes forward to us quite frequently, and I would like to see, moving forward, us have some progress in this area. So that's where I stand, Town Manager.
I was going to recast the consensus, but I saw 2 members raise their hands. I'll defer to them.
So we'll call on them. Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you. As far as the hillside folks, a really long extension cord. Okay. But as far as the summer versus winter, I think this is our 12th Spare the Air Day, and we've had 7 in a row, including today. So I don't see how we can really isolate summer from winter on this, and I would recommend that we not just focus on the summer, that it be all-inclusive whenever there's a Spare the Air Day. And I do agree that we should move forward, and hopefully we can start educating our community regarding this as well.
Councilmember Spector.
In response to Mr. Brzezinski, I also agree that it just so happens that we get the staff report in the middle of 12 Spare the Air Days in the winter, and by the way, it's tomorrow also. So I concur. I think that we should include Spare the Air Days in the winter, and that we. And the question I had through the mayor was: does staff want a motion, or do they feel as though they have enough direction where they can now go through a list of what they heard by virtue of consensus?
Mr. Larson.
Yes. Mr. Mayor, since this is a study session, no motion or specific action is required. Any implementation actions will come back to the council, most likely in the framework of ordinance amendments and how we would implement those amendments, and that's where the council will make their final decisions. What we have taken as the council consensus and discussion is either a clear majority or overall consensus for basically all of the recommendations that were presented by staff, with the notation that any leaf blower exchange program would not incur any town expense at this point in time. It would be simply working with other jurisdictions to make that a higher priority for BACMed, and then to add into the discussion and the recommended ordinance changes the restriction on both gas blowers over 65 decibels and gas leaf blowers both. I heard at least 3 members express an interest in both restrictions, and that we extend it to all properties in town, not just residential, and that it would be also, we would come back with further restrictions on the hours and a prohibition on Sundays and holidays. And that's what we took as the council direction.
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. So can you clarify if we ban the use of gas-powered, then on Spare the Air Days, then they can't use electric either? Is that what we're saying? I mean, if it's gas-powered, if it's banned, then it's banned. So I'm.
Yeah, so I think what staff is recommending is for council to give us direction to ban to prohibit the use of gas-powered leaf blowers or prohibit leaf blowers over 65 decibels. On Spare the Air days, I think what the council has directed staff to pursue is that on Spare the Air days, no leaf blower usage, regardless if it's an electric or a gas that meets the 65 decibel threshold, would be allowed to be used on Spare the Air days. That's my understanding.
So that would be confusing to me, because I think you need to clarify, because I thought I heard the majority saying banning both, not an or, but both. And does electric produce, if Spare the Air Day is not about decibels, so does electric emit emissions that would feed into that? So that's just confusing to me.
I did hear the council majority say do both restrictions, a prohibition on gas and a prohibition on gas blowers over 65 decibels. And by including all properties in town, it kind of makes the differentiation for Spare the Air days less important for Los Gatos, but I still think us participating in that as a regional effort makes sense. So there's common communication throughout the Bay Area on Spare the Air days.
Councilmember Spector and then Councilmember Brzezinski.
It would be my understanding that with regard, I had the same thought that Ms. McNutt did, if you're not, what about on Spare the Air Day? If you're going to get rid of ban the gas blowers, then why would you care if it's the electric? And in my mind, my experience, what I see, what I hear, it's the particulate matter that even the electric blowers generate would have an impact on the Spare the Air days.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Well, I think it's an interesting question that perhaps we should take another look at. My understanding about Spare the Air days is related to the emissions from the gas blowers. It's not the dust that is that's stirred up. Just like it's on vehicle exhaust, it's on wood burning. And the types of toxics that are emitted in those cases. So I really don't think, if we're looking at Spare the Air days, we should be really cognizant of what Spare the Air days are for, and it's not and maybe more restrictive than what we're thinking. My own inclination would be, if we're focusing right now on gas leaf blowers and leaf blowers over 65 decibels, those would be the two things we're focusing on. I think once we start to include the electric, then we're starting to go a little far afield, and I think it's counterintuitive at that point.
So, just to summarize this point, for me, I was under the impression that Spare the Air days dealt strictly with the two-cycle, the gasoline emissions as well. But I would like to include that in the city of Palo Alto, they put generators and they plug electric leaf blowers into the generators, and the generators cause pollution. So further direction for staff would be, and from my point of view, to not allow to have that happen, because that kind of defeats the purpose of what we're trying to achieve here.
And on the Spare the Air Day, Mayor, staff will come back with either a recommendation or alternatives, given how the staff recommendation was broadened to include all parcels in town and the limit on both types. I know for individuals, Spare the Air days serve as a notice of, for those who have lung disease, to avoid particulate matter, avoid being outside, where there could be a secondary benefit that's not related to gas engine emissions. But that's one of the issues that staff would review as we bring back an ordinance for you and make a recommendation at that time.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Mr. Larson just addressed my question. Thank you.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for staff through the mayor, if I might. What is your timing? I know you're going to come back, staff plans on coming back in 6 months with a report, but what is your timing for advising the public of this new process?
We were awaiting this discussion with council to see the direction you wanted to go before mapping out when the ordinance changes would come back forward. In the preparation of those ordinance changes, we would hope to have opportunities to communicate with the public about the pending regulations, so they could speak to those issues as well. And then the 6-month window would be after the effective date of the ordinance, because that would launch the process. We haven't discussed, this is a broader set of ordinance changes as we include all commercial and non-residential parcels. Christina, do you have an estimate of April, May
That sounds reasonable.
to
for
bring
now,
back
yeah.
the ordinance changes?
Thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, we're going to take a recess till 7 o'clock. is being called to order. Welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority December 16th, 2013 meeting. At this time, I'd like to remind the audience to please silence all your communication devices. And we are ready for the roll call.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here?
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Przinsky.
Here.
Vice Mayor Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Steve Leonardis.
Here. At this time, I would like to invite our two pledge leaders up, Bob and Pat Jones, to join me up here. So Bob and Pat Jones have lived in Los Gatos for 44 years. That's about how old I am. They have 3 children who all graduated from Los Gatos schools, including Los Gatos High School. They have 5 grandchildren. Pat volunteers for Village House and Garden for 10 years and leads house tours for the History Museum. Pat is a member of the Kiwanis Club of Los Gatos and is an advisor to the Builders Club at Fisher Middle School. Pat is currently a deacon for the Los Gatos Presbyterian Church and is a former elder. She is on the executive board of Presbyterian Women and established the Prayer Shawl ministry for the church. Pat loves gardening and knitting. As a member of the Kiwanis Club of Los Gatos, Bob brought the turnaround scholarships to Los Gatos. Since 1999, 128 students have received $1,000 each in scholarships to help them build better futures. In the 1970s, Bob was the Scoutmaster of Troop 501 for 9 years. Bob was a charter member of the Los Gatos Youth Park and helped establish the Youth Citizens of the Year. Bob has been a master of ceremonies for a number of events and has worked on the annual Christmas holiday parade for more than 20 years. In his non-town life, Bob spent 22 years as a computer design engineer for IBM, including 10 years at IBM in San Jose, helping develop the first disk drives for computers. Bob began his life helping his dad operate a small dairy farm in northern New York with 20 cows, which were all hand-milked during World War II. They had no tractors, just horses to do the work. What Bob loves most about Los Gatos is the way town folks join together in support of the diverse activities they enjoy. For example, Fiesta de Arts, the 4th of July, even the town tree lighting. What Pat loves most about Los Gatos is the people. And I have to ask you, since it's not on here, how long have you been married? If you don't.
57.
57 years.
That's close enough.
It's close enough. Let's give a round of applause for Bob and Pat Jones.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You gotta shake hands. Yes, shake hands.
Yes.
Good.
Lovely party gifts. Thank you very much.
Let's give one more round of applause for Bob and Pat. Thank you for coming in tonight. Next is our appointments to our boards and commissions and committees. And on December 9th, Monday, last week, council interviewed a number of candidates for various commissions and committees. And I just wanted to know if council had any questions about the process or any questions of staff about what will happen. Seeing none, I'd like to ask the clerk administrator to begin the appointment process.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I will be announcing the boards, commissions, and committees along with the number of vacancies and number of applicants who have applied to the positions. Then I will then announce each applicant and ask for a vote by a show of hands. Once council has completed the voting process for the commission, I will announce the applicant or applicants who have been selected to that position. This process will continue for each board, commission, and committee during the appointment process. Upon completion of the appointment process, council may direct the clerk administrator to re-advertise for any open positions. For the voting scenarios, for a commission candidate to be appointed, a majority vote of 3 or more must occur. In the event a majority vote does not occur, staff recommends that council consider the following process. For a voting scenario of 2, 2, and 1, the candidates receiving 1 or fewer votes are eliminated and runoff is held on the candidates that received 2 votes. For a 2, 1, 1, 1, council votes again for the candidate that received 2 votes. The candidate is appointed if she or he receives a majority. If not, the position is re-advertised. For a 1, 1, 1, 1, the position is re-advertised. Are there any questions?
Seeing none?
So for the first one is the Arts and Culture Commission. The first applicant is Brian Bernasconi. Okay. The next applicant is Denise Carter. The next applicant is Luis Hernandez. The final applicant is Dawn Rose. Okay, that concludes the arts and culture. We'll move on to.
The appointed candidates for arts and culture are Brian Bernasconi, Denise Carter, and Dawn Rose.
Okay, thank you. For community and senior services, the first applicant is Natalie Ladd. The next applicant is Evelyn Mitsunaga. The next applicant is Janine Pratt. The final applicant is Lily Seraphin.
The appointed candidates are Evelyn Mitsunaga, Janine Pratt, and Lily Seraphin.
The next is the library board, Thomas Atkinson. And the next applicant is Luis Hernandez.
The appointed applicant is Thomas Atkinson.
The next one is Parks Commission, Eric Fox. The next one is Sandy Gordon. The last one is Rob Rennie.
The appointed applicants are Eric Fox, Sandy Gordon, and Rob Rennie.
Next one is Personnel Board, Lisa, I'm not sure how to say her last name, Agari. The next one is Rick Tinsley.
Both applicants, Lisa Aguiar and Rick Tinsley, are appointed.
So next one is for Planning Commission. First one is Mary Badami. Kendra Birch. Melanie Hansen. Luis Hernandez. Matthew Hughes. Todd Jarvis. And Rob Rennie.
The appointed applicants are Mary Badame and Kendra Birch.
Final one is Transportation and Parking. The first applicant is Barbara Holden. The next one is Garrett Kolb, Natalie Ladd, and Morgan Slane.
Applicants Natalie Ladd and Morgan Slane are appointed.
So at this time, I'd like to congratulate all those who were appointed, and those who were not appointed, please feel free to apply in the future. With that said, we're looking for some council direction on how we'd like to approach this going forward. If we'd like to re-advertise the vacancies right away, or if we'd like to wait for the next cycle. So, any input on that? Councilmember Brzezinski.
There are a number of openings. I think we should re-advertise.
If that's a motion, I will second it.
There's no motion required, just looking for some consensus. So we have two. Councilmember Spector?
That's fine, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember, okay, so it sounds like the direction is we will re-advertise the open positions to seek further candidates. Next on our agenda is a presentation to the Victim Services Unit in our police department. I'd like to invite those who are here this evening, including Kathy Williams, Fariba Sarouche, Mary Badame, Captain Mike D'Antonio, Sergeant Clinton Tata, Captain Matt Frisbee, and Chief Scott Seaman. Join me at the podium. I'm proud to be standing here with you this evening to present this award for excellence in victim services to this team. This award is made by the International Association of Police Chiefs. Los Gatos received first place in the small cities category. I understand that other members of the unit are in the audience. If you'd like to come forward and stand with us, you can come forward at this time. Kathy Williams, this is for you. I'd like to invite you and Captain D'Antonio to speak, if you'd like.
I'm extremely honored to be up here this evening. This unit was the brainchild of a retired Captain, Elena Forrest, and she really brought it forward, launched it, and gave us the ability to get to where we were at today. One of the things that she wanted to do was to have a unit that had the ability to reach each and every victim of a crime or police-related services in the town. We can proudly say that these volunteers have achieved that accomplishment. We also have the ability to respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if a member of the police department has a need, they see a victim of need, if it's 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, we'll make a call and one of these volunteers will respond. And we are so honored to have this award and to have this unit to be part of the town of Los Gatos. Thank you.
Thank you. I certainly echo Mike's, Captain D'Antonio's comments, and it is an honor to accept this award. It was an honor to travel to Philadelphia and accept it with these fine gentlemen. And it is an honor to be a part of such a fine department as Los Gatos Montesrino Police Department. In addition, this is our team. We also have a few members that weren't able to be here this evening, but Mary Badami and Fariba Sarouche share team leader positions with myself, and then we have Judy Kennedy, Laura Kramer, Gay Latore, and Judy Hanf. And so it's great work, and we appreciate the opportunity to serve the Los Gatos Montesrino community.
Thank you again to the Victim Services Unit. Thank you. Thank you. Next on our agenda is the closed session report. We'd like to refer to the town attorney for that.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, members of the public. Prior to tonight's regular session, Council met in closed session on two matters. The first was anticipated litigation, and the second was real property negotiations. As to both of these items, no action that was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. I would like to remind those in attendance tonight, if you'd like to speak on any item not on the agenda, please fill out a speaker card and turn it into the clerk. Council and manager reports. Council matters. Does any member of council have anything they'd like to share? Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Community Development Advisory Committee met since the last council meeting, and the Vice Mayor and I are members of that committee, and we discussed potential development of the current Elks Lodge property on Winchester Boulevard.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had two meetings in the regional arena. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority met in Oakland 2 weeks ago to discuss issues relative to funding of various transportation opportunities in the South Bay. And then I chaired the Valley Transportation Authority Board of Directors meeting. This is the last meeting of this year, at which time we celebrated the retirement of our current general manager, Michael Burns, and welcomed our new general manager, Nuria Fernandez, into the VTA fold.
Myself, I have attended two meetings since our last meeting on behalf of the town. One was for the West Valley Solid Waste Management Authority, where we approved a new 10-year contract for services, and the other was the West Valley Sanitation District, which was general business meeting. Next is consent items. Town manager.
Yes. First, a few items from staff under manager reports. First, the final holiday stroll for the town, organized by the town and the Chamber of Commerce, is this Thursday from 6 to 9 p.m., a new initiative to celebrate downtown and the holiday shopping season. Second, did want to remind the council and public of the Civic Center closure from December 23rd through January 1st. However, police dispatch and patrol, as well as parks and streets maintenance, will work as is standard for most weekends, and our library will be open on both weekends and returning to normal schedule on January 2nd. Last, I did want to announce that through the end of this month, we will be continuing to implement and wanted to provide fair warning on the new digital enforcement program being launched by the police department, and we will be providing courtesy notices and warnings to residents as we roll out that system through the end of the month, leading up to implementation January 6th. Moving to consent calendar, as the mayor has requested, there were two desk items provided to council. One is for your agenda item 1A, which is the minutes of the December 2nd meeting. We corrected a number of resolution numbers as well as the title of the seconder of a motion on that agenda. And then we've also provided a desk item on item number 4, which is the AHA's Affordable Housing Overlay Zone Design Guidelines. That matter will be dropped from tonight's agenda with your action and continued to a future meeting so staff can continue to make revisions to those guidelines. And I did want to announce that for item number 6, we do need to ask the clerk to read the title of that item, and unless the matter is pulled, the council action will include opening and closing of the hearing for that item. So, Mr. Mayor, if I could ask the clerk to read the title to the ordinance for item number 6.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos replacing Chapter 6 Building Regulations and Chapter 9 Fire Prevention and Protection of the Town of Los Gatos Municipal Code and adopting new 2013 California Building and Fire Codes.
Thank you. So with that, does any member of council wish to pull a consent item? Seeing none, I myself will be recusing myself from item number 7. Or abstaining from voting on item number 7. Does any member of the public wish to pull a consent item? Seeing none, I'll look to the council for a motion on the consent calendar. Vice Mayor.
I'll move approval of the consent calendar, absent number 4, and with the corrections contained in our desk item regarding 1A, the minutes from December 2nd.
Second.
Thank you. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Moving on to verbal communications. So far, I have one speaker card. If anybody wishes to speak, please feel free to fill out a card. You have 3 minutes to say whatever you want about anything that's not on our agenda this evening. The first speaker is John Shepherdson.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. First, I wanted to thank council members Przinski and McNutt for meeting with me recently. I very much appreciate that. Secondly, I want to thank Manager Larson for responding to my request regarding the homelessness issue and the cold and what we can do about that. I appreciate that. And I forward that on to Beverly Bryant, who's going to be working tomorrow at St. Luke's to do some charitable work. Thirdly, I wanted to briefly speak about the lawsuit, the Albright lawsuit. There was a recent decision by Judge Huber, and he found that the council's action was proper. And I would just say that just as the developer chose to go beyond the Planning Commission's decision and go to the council, the people have the right to appeal Judge Huber's decision and go to a higher court. So that's we are a town, a state of laws, and we are following the legal process. My next point is with respect to the Albright project in terms of the ballot. I only have 3 minutes. We're a small group that you're aware of. There's a larger group behind us, and the developers submitted a lengthy campaign, including a mailer, but it's really not a matter of A or B, it's a matter of degree. And it's our view that the 350,000 square feet, which is the superior alternative under the EIR, was really best for the town and for the environment. The developer chose to go for 550,000, and then the council approved 485,000. What I'm concerned about is that incremental 135,000 square feet of office space. I calculate that that's going to result in an incremental car trips per day of 1,700. And I'm using an 8-person per 1,000 square feet because I think these high-tech companies pack in the workers, they put them in tables and laptops, so we're dealing with a different dynamic. And we also know from the recent article in the San Jose Mercury News that now San Jose has gone from the 13th worst in terms of traffic to the 5th, and I anticipate that that will increase. And so I think that it's a mistake in light of this additional data to be creating a project that will create that many new car trips on a very narrow pathway in town, which will impact the rest of the town. And with my 3 seconds left, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherdson. Any questions for the speaker? Seeing none. Would anybody else like to speak? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to other business. We have a staff report from Chief Seaman.
Mayor Leonardis, members of the council, Scott Seaman, Police Chief. The item before you addresses a request to consider approval of an agreement between the town of Los Gatos and the Stadium Authority and the city of Santa Clara to allow for the hiring of police officers from the town of Los Gatos to work as reserve police officers with the city of Santa Clara to meet a need for regional security for the new Levi Stadium. This is a new facility in this area that has resource demands that go beyond the ability of the city of Santa Clara to provide security. The police chief and actually prior police chiefs in Santa Clara have met with the County Police Chief Association and discussed how security could be provided and discussed a number of options. And all of the police chiefs in Santa Clara County have agreed to help in some fashion. As the chiefs and members of town staff and city staffs around the county have worked on this issue, the matter before you has emerged as the preferred alternative, and that is taking advantage of permission within the state construct of peace officer certification to allow for what's called double badging, meaning that a police officer who's sworn to work in one agency could actually be sworn in to work for a second agency as a reserve police officer. This is a model that is not used frequently in Northern California, but it's used much more frequently in Southern California for issues such as this, and even to allow officers to work between agencies. However, in this case, this unique stadium, which has such large demand and regional reach for its impacts, both traffic but also the draw from people from around the area, including, we fully expect, people from our community and from Montecito, requires the provision or the utilization of a larger professional force of officers. And so the police chiefs are unanimous in their support of supporting the need for security efforts for the Santa Clara Levi's Stadium. And I support, and the town supports, the use of this agreement and the provisions that have been prepared by the city attorneys from the region to give both the individual contributing agencies indemnification and to legally allow officers to work on this regional project. I'm very prepared to answer any questions that you may have, and that completes my report.
Thank you, Chief. Questions? Vice Mayor?
I have 3 questions, if I may.
Yes.
Chief, thank you. The first question is, the Los Gatos police officer, say, who is cross-designated, will use all of their town-issued equipment in order to carry out their duties for the Santa Clara Police Department. If something breaks, is damaged, etc., is Santa Clara going to pay for a new one, or is Los Gatos going to pay for a new one?
I did ask the Santa Clara police chief, and it's my understanding that Santa Clara will reimburse the town for that. We don't see that as a common practice across NFL stadiums around the country, but if it were to happen, every indication I have had, although it's not specifically called out in the agreement, is that Santa Clara will make the officer and the agency whole.
My second question is, leaving workers' comp aside in the agreement that is proposed, if an officer is injured working for Santa Clara Police Department, how will Los Gatos Montecito Police Department backfill that position so that we are not losing an officer because of that off-duty, if you will, work?
Sure, there are 2 pieces to the workers' compensation dynamic. One is, how does the officer, him or herself, get compensated, and that is addressed in the memo, and it's covered through a special agreement that Santa Clara is creating on behalf of all of its newly hired reserve officers. As a practical matter, if an officer were to be off on disability for any period of time, it would create a vacancy for us. And to the degree that staffing were limited, we could be expected to call somebody back on overtime to work that shift.
And my final question is, there's something in the report I realize, but aside from providing an opportunity for officers to work this and obviously go to a football game and provide security, but what's the benefit to Los Gatos? We're giving up officers. I realize it's not on their duty time, but what's the benefit to Los Gatos to do this?
The benefits are probably less tangible than if we were to participate in a joint enforcement exercise where it impacted crime and criminality that might directly affect Los Gatos. This being a regional effort, I think the benefit of the region having professional police officers and having officers who know each other within the region and have an opportunity to work alongside each other, I think there's a sort of a less tangible but important benefit for those officers to develop professional relationships that I believe will carry over to other work they do. In addition, these officers are going to, by virtue of being in this setting, be trained in large gathering operations, and so if there were any other large event that they were deployed to, I think they're going to more naturally be able to work comfortably on that and have a slower speed-up curve. And it for me falls in the category of the work we do around many of the major investigations is we're committed to collaboration and to sharing resources and to do it in a way that helps others while recognizing may not be a one-for-one benefit for each of our agencies.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And some of the answers to my questions may be in the contract, but I'm going to have you pull it out for me if I didn't find it. One is there is liability insurance being provided, but if there are damages that exceed the coverage, I'm assuming that's going to be covered by the City of Santa Clara, but I wanted to confirm that.
That's correct. When the attorneys from 9 cities negotiated this agreement, there were no limitations on the insurance cap. So while the insurance provision of the agreement calls out specifically a primary policy and that each of the town and cities that are participating will be additional insured, the City of Santa Clara as well as the stadium do carry their own excess liability for which will be available in the event of a significant claim.
All right, thank you. In the past, the council has been made aware of instances when our officers here in Los Gatos have had a lot of demands put on their work time, and this could be another demand. How would you, as chief, see these issues being addressed?
We have 38 sworn police officers right now, and it's my understanding that 3 of 38 have filed applications with Santa Clara to be double badged. To the degree that they're in an assignment where they have predictable time off, and a detective would be an example where typically they have 3 days off. It could be a weekend, a couple of weekend days, and one other day during the week. They're not needed for patrol shifts. They're not working that way anyway, and it would not be a problem for them to work in this other assignment. Any of these officers who would be applying for this must file an outside work permit, and that gives the administration the opportunity to evaluate both at the time of the application and subsequently whether or not outside work is having a negative impact on the work at the police department, and gives us the ability to scale back hours or to withdraw the work permit. To the case of a person who's working patrol or something else where they might take time off from work to be able to work in an assignment, they have the legal ability to take time off, and to the degree that creates a vacancy, we're going to have to evaluate the impact on operations if they were doing that. But it would be as if they were to take a day off to go to the beach with a family. They get to use their time the way that they choose to. We will be watching, as will all police chiefs in the county, to see how this works, because this is brand new for all of us. And I think every city is going to face the same dilemma. There's a sense that there's an allure to working these football games. I know pretty certainly that our officers will not be on any yard line or in any stadium watching a game. I think they're probably going to be deployed outside. I think it's not going to have the glamour that it may initially appear to be. And I'm confident that the chiefs are unified in their approach to this, that we'll be able to monitor it, and that Santa Clara has demonstrated very good will to make sure that it's the right relationship on an ongoing basis.
All right, and thank you. And also the compensation flowing from this work, will that go to the town or the officer?
Well, the officer will be an employee of the City of Santa Clara, so they'll be paid directly by either the City of Santa Clara or the Stadium Authority.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have a couple questions. The first being that, is this detail limited to just football games, or would they be working other events at the stadium, such as rock concerts and such?
They will be working anything that happens at the stadium, so it will include all manner of events.
Okay. Would there be any limitation to the amount of hours that they put in? Could they work an 8-hour shift at the stadium and then say they work 10 to 6, and then they come into our organization and they work a swing shift 11 to 7 a.m.? Would that be something that would be allowed?
That's an excellent question, because it really does go to a critical scheduling component. And both from my prior experience at San Jose and my philosophy here is we would put conditions on the work permit that they cannot work in between shifts that would cause them to be fatigued, because this is the primary assignment. So my expectation would be that they would work on days off. They could work at the end of a shift, which follows and leads into days off. I think that's acceptable, but I wouldn't want them coming back to work. We work 12 hours and 20 minutes each shift, and so I wouldn't want them to work that, go do something, and then try and come back that night.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, if any member of the public would like to come speak on this matter, please fill out a card and bring it to the clerk. No cards. That officially closes the public hearing, and I look to council for discussion on this. Questions? Councilmember Brzezinski.
I'll make a motion prior to discussion. I'd like to authorize the town manager to execute this agreement with the Santa Clara Stadium Authority and the City of Santa Clara to set forth terms and conditions under which the town police officers may be authorized to work as reserve officers for the City of Santa Clara at the new stadium.
A motion, do we have a second? Councilmember McNutt.
Second.
Discussion. Vice Mayor.
Well, I appreciate Chief Seaman's rationale and the report, and I appreciate the idea of collaboration, certainly. We've had several discussions over my year as a council person regarding code enforcement, when police are available to us, when they're not, what we can do, what we can enforce. Just tonight at our study session, we were talking about perhaps not passing an ordinance because we didn't have the personnel to enforce it. While I understand that you're going to be careful with the scheduling, I still can't support authorizing our officers to work for another city when I think that we're already taxed here.
Further discussion. I'll weigh in. I'm kind of on the fence on this one. I do feel like, of course, our first priority in Los Gatos is to our community, and we have a very well-respected and staffed police department, and I would like their primary focus, of course, to always be our community. I am concerned about things happening that are kind of unforeseen circumstances. You never know what can happen at these major events, and it could lead to more work for our staff and more cost to our staff, being that if somebody is injured, we have to replace that person. We have to hire and interview additional police officers. So there's things like that that concern me. Not sure where I'm going to vote on this one yet, but I do have my concerns about it. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This agreement has very, what I'm going to call liberal termination provisions. In other words, it isn't that hard to get out of it, and the time frame in which to get out of it isn't that long. And so with that kind of a safety net, I feel comfortable supporting the motion. However, that being said, when we have issues come up, such as we don't have the staff to, I think what Ms. Jensen said, we don't have staff to do enforcement, or issues come up as to the number of hours that the officers have to work here in Los Gatos. Those are the kinds of things I will be looking at in the future. But for now, tonight, I will be supporting the motion.
So we have a motion, a second. Further discussion, Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yeah, I'm feeling very comfortable with this. Our officers are not here 24/7 waiting for something to happen. These are officers who are off duty. They're working on their own time. I absolutely believe that the chief's constraints on what the officers can do and the number of hours that they can work are completely valid, and I absolutely trust that they will be acted on appropriately. As far as this event goes, as Councilmember Spector noted, the right to remove ourselves from this participation is available to us. I would be guaranteed if there's a major earthquake, we're not going to be working Santa Clara Stadium. I think our folks will probably be back here, and I think every one of the other officers with the other agencies will be where their first duties are. And so, to me, this is a very appropriate thing, and I think it gives an added perk to our police officers, something for them to be able to experience. I was actually going to ask the chief if being a former commander of the Los Gatos Police Disaster Response Team qualified me to be one of the individuals who could be selected, but I would not want to work outside the stadium. But apparently that would not be the case. So so I would really encourage the chief to move forward with this for the enhancement of our team.
Further discussion, Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. And again, I just want to reiterate that this does not take away any resources from the town of Los Gatos. If we should come up with a pot of money where we wanted to pay overtime for our officers for additional hours for them to do code enforcement, that would be a priority because that would be a town assignment. And I do think that collaboration regionally is very important. And I remember on a recent murder investigation that was the city of Santa Clara that really stepped up and was part of that, of getting that under control. And I've just have seen several instances of that through the years. So we are part of a region. We need to work together. And I think this is a really good example of how that can be done fairly for everyone.
A question for staff. Is this something that we can review after 1 year or 6 months, come back and revisit to see how the program is working out in reference to Councilmember Spector's comments that if things were not working out so well, we could get out of this agreement?
Yes, I don't know that we'll have empirical data other than asking Santa Clara to give us a report on when they used our people. We can certainly explore that, and I do know that you're interested in tracking how this goes, so we'll make reasonable efforts, every reasonable effort to be able to give you that information.
Okay. Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Passes 4-1. Next is something that we have to say goodbye to somebody this evening. Our town attorney, Judith Propp, who's been with us for 3 years, serving us faithfully. I'd like to have you come over to me, and we have something for you. We know you don't like surprises. You didn't want a lot of fanfare, but I'm sorry, we didn't listen. So, Judith has been with us for 3 years. It's about the whole time I was here. It was a pleasure for me to work with her. She served with, a lot of tough land use issues on our council. And we're here to say goodbye to her this evening. This is her very last work, was this issue with Chief Seaman and the Santa Clara Stadium. So, Judith, thank you. Thank you on behalf of the council. Shake everyone's hand. We're going to miss you. Do not be a stranger. So Judith is going to share a few words with us.
Thank you for indulging me. Since this is my last council meeting prior to my retirement later this month, I would like to take a moment to thank the council. It has truly been a privilege and an honor to serve you as well as the town over the past several years. Thank you for your leadership, your commitment to making the town a wonderful place to both work and live. I very much appreciate the opportunity to have worked with each of you as well as some of your predecessors as well over the past few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Moving on to our first public hearing of the evening. This is an appeal to a planning commission architecture and site application S-13-050 and a conditional use application U-13-020. Project is located at 16268 Los Gatos Boulevard. And do we have a staff report?
This property is located on the east side of Los Gatos Boulevard. It's one lot south of Shannon Road. The development of the parcel is restricted by the presence of an access easement that runs along the north property line and a requirement for larger setbacks on both the rear and side property lines since the property is adjacent to another property that's in a residential zone. The existing building on the site was constructed in the 1940s. The property was annexed into the town in 1961, and the building was converted to commercial use in the 70s. It has been vacant for some time. It was vacant when the current owner purchased the property in February of 2013. The most recent uses on the site were personal service and office. The existing building on the property is about 2,000 square feet. The applicant is proposing to construct a two-story building that's just under 7,000 square feet. The building would be 25 feet at its highest point. That is inclusive of an equipment well that would hide or screen any roof-mounted equipment. The allowable height limit in this C1 zone is 35 feet, so the building's considerably under that. The building was originally submitted as a very modern style. The applicant completely redesigned the architecture of the building, working with staff and the town's architectural consultant to address a number of concerns that were raised. And it has now got more of a residential character in line with that area of Los Gatos Boulevard. The Planning Commission considered this project on October 23rd. The Commission approved the project with two added conditions, one requiring the roofing material to be changed from a standing seam metal to tile, and the other to add some balconies and recess the second floor and add some more articulation. The applicant has made that revision to the plans, so the plans that are attached to the council report do represent the changes that were required by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission's decision was appealed on November 4th by the owner of an adjacent commercial building that's located at Shannon and Los Gatos Boulevard. The council has three options. One is that the appeal could be denied and the Planning Commission's decision to approve the project upheld. One is to grant the appeal and remand the matter to the Planning Commission for further consideration, and the third would be to grant the appeal and deny the application. Staff's available if you have any questions.
I'd like to first ask the council if you have any disclosures. Vice Mayor?
I have visited the property on numerous occasions, and I met with the applicant and his architect last week at their request.
Councilmember Brzezinski?
Yes, I also visited the property several times. I met with the applicant and his architect as well about a week or so ago at their office, and then I've had conversations with the appellant regarding the property and regarding their appeal.
Councilmember Spector?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have visited the property. I have met with the property owner and his architect, and I've had a telephone conversation with Marlon Smith.
Councilmember McNutt?
Thank you, Mayor. I visited the property and I met with the applicant and his architect.
Okay. I too have visited the property and I met with the applicant and his architect. So questions for staff? Vice Mayor?
I have two questions. The first one, actually, I'll refer to the Planning Commission report that was included with our packet. It's on page 7, and it's paragraph E that says traffic. And the second sentence says how many square feet they're proposing, and that'll generate about 51 average daily trips. And then it says it's expected to add 9 trips during the AM peak period and 8 trips during the PM peak period. Is that calculated with credits for traffic from the prior use that's now vacant?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And I'm just curious. I looked at the community benefit policy and the traffic impact fee policy, and I couldn't really find a crediting mechanism in community benefit, but I could find one in the mitigation fee benefit with respect to the fees paid. And that says that the town may credit a use for former traffic, but doesn't say it must. So I was just curious how the staff approaches that.
Traffic fees are calculated by Parks and Public Works, not planning, so I'm not a complete expert on that subject, but it has traditionally been the credit for the previous use on the site has been factored in, if it's something that existed, I believe, back into the 90s. There's a date associated with that. If it was something that was there 30 years ago, obviously we wouldn't take that into consideration. But usually the highest traffic generating use that had been on the site since the deadline, there's a date in the policy itself, and it's sometime, I believe it's 92, but I may be incorrect on that date.
The community development director and I think it's 85 or 86.
Okay.
Okay, my second question is, I'd like to be reminded of the role of our consulting architect, Larry Cannon. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. I believe him to be a consultant who provides information to the Planning Commission and the Council which we can consider but must not accept. Am I correct about that?
He is an architectural consultant. His job is to review the plans for compliance with town codes, policies, primarily the commercial design guidelines in this case. So he evaluates the project using the commercial design guidelines, looking at also the Los Gatos Boulevard plan, which is another document that applies to this property. So he does make recommendations. Generally, the Planning Commission doesn't require, there's actually a council adopted resolution that states that the Planning Commission, unless there's compelling evidence received at the hearing, that they generally do not change the architecture as recommended by the consultant. So we generally take the consultant's advice. In this particular case, he had some concerns about the original style. Staff and the architect met with the project architect and the owner of the building to go through the project and make significant changes to the style of the building so that it would fit into the site better and fit into that stretch of Los Gatos Boulevard. I believe the council does have purview to change the style, though, if you feel it's appropriate to do so.
I just wanted to know what Mr. Cannon's role was. Thanks.
Further questions? Seeing none, I would like to remind the public, if you'd like to speak on this matter, to please fill out a card and give it to the clerk. I'd like at this time to invite up the applicant. You have 10 minutes to the appellant? The appellant, you have 10 minutes to speak. Sorry.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Marshall Smith. I live on Greendale Drive in Los Gatos. My brothers Marlon, Myron, and myself are the appellants. We recognize Los Gatos Boulevard is and has been in transition, and something new will be built on this site. We are not here to request you deny anything to be built on the site. This area of Los Gatos Boulevard is intensifying because of the Laurel Muse new construction, traffic to Yoga Source, and Fisher. Eventually, there will be construction on the corner where Artisan is located. Even though the applicant followed the commercial design guidelines, this building is too big and not compatible with the area. The proposed setback, this building will destroy the visual continuity to the open space associated with the area. This portion of the boulevard is 2 lanes in each direction, transitioning to 3 lanes heading north towards Blossom Hill Road. And heading south towards Main Street transitions at Louise Van Meter to 1 lane each way. This building has a proposed 15-foot setback, while the average setback along this section of the boulevard is 36 feet on the east side and 25 feet on the west side. The new residential project, Laurel Muse, has 13 to 16 feet setbacks along the boulevard, and there is no pedestrian access to these homes from the boulevard. All access is from the backside or from the side streets. The proposed building has an entry facing the boulevard, but all of the parking is behind and underneath the building. There is no allowed street parking on this side or on this 2-lane stretch of the boulevard. The front entrance will be seldom used. All visitors will enter from the back of the building. That's not pedestrian friendly. We have prepared a few photos illustrating the massiveness of the proposed building. What visually is seen now is a heavily treed canopy. This building will replace with a long wall as viewed from the north facing south towards Louise Van Meter. The next view is from the south facing north towards Los Gatos Boulevard. This demonstrates the visual continuity of the open space associated with this area will be destroyed. Is this what the town really wants the boulevard to look like? We believe that this or similar building arrangements is not good for the visual impact of the neighborhood. Previously, at community charrettes, also known as community meetings, there were presentations illustrating the use of frontage driveway to create a more pedestrian-friendly atmosphere of the buildings facing the boulevard. This arrangement allows vehicles to drive in and park without impeding traffic movement. There are examples of newer buildings with this arrangement on the boulevard north of Lark Avenue. Here is an example of the two-way frontage driveway that functions much like a frontage road. These buildings are on a section of the boulevard that has no on-street parking, just like the section where the proposed building in question is located. If these buildings had a 15-foot setback from the boulevard and all parking was from behind the building, the result would be a wall of buildings for several hundred feet with no traffic in front. The same frontage driveway arrangement is possible on the site of the proposed building. We believe that this design change to a similar arrangement would be positive to the transition of the character of the area and good for the neighborhood. Some of the members of the Planning Commission expressed their concern for having this building placed so close to the boulevard. We believe their concern was well-founded and should have been reflected more rigorously in their motion to approve. Simply creating covered balconies on the upper level, where the roof still extends to the front, is insufficient and does not change the massive visual impact on the boulevard. The Planning Commission asked if the applicant had looked at moving the building back and provide a row of parking up front. The applicant responded that the proposed parking arrangement would be greatly affected, and they would have to build a racetrack around the building, and the size of the building would be reduced, which means it affects the economic suitability of the project, which is not a sufficient reason for allowing a 15-foot setback and creating a disturbing visual impact on the boulevard. The newer buildings at the other end of the boulevard strongly suggest it is possible to build a financially viable building with some parking up front. The design guidelines of the boulevard do indeed call for buildings to be pulled forward, but it also calls for new buildings to provide continuity along the street frontage. This portion of the boulevard is distinctly different from the 6-lane portion from Shannon Road to Lark Avenue and should reflect the existing visual continuity of nearby buildings that have a greater setback, starting with the Trinity Building to Shannon Road. The Trinity Building and the church will not be changing for a long time. If the proposed building is approved with a 15-foot setback, it will set the tone for adjacent properties. This next illustration, looking towards north, towards Blossom Hill Road, depicts the wall of buildings that will eventually line this area of the boulevard. Pulling any buildings to the street from the church to Shannon Road will change that continuity and will have a disturbing and upsetting visual impact on the area. We believe that the Planning Commission made a mistake by letting the economic considerations affect their motion to approve this proposed building with the setback so close to the boulevard. This site is not too small, the building is too big. Trying to squeeze as much footage onto the site is an economic approach which is at the expense of the visual continuity of the area. For the good of the neighborhood, we request that you accept our appeal and send this back to the Planning Commission with direction. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, we'll try and answer them.
Any questions? Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first step whenever I have an appeal as opposed to an application is I look to see if I can make one of the findings that I have to make to grant the appeal, and they're very defined. And so under your analysis, what is the basis for granting the appeal? What has the Planning Commission done wrong? What didn't they consider under the law as to how you grant an appeal? How can I make that finding?
Well, as I said, I think that they made a mistake by granting this 15-foot setback and not taking into consideration the visual appeal and the continuity of the neighborhood.
And if I can follow up on that, in doing the setback that they did, were they ignoring the boulevard plan or one of our ordinances, or were they implementing the boulevard plan and the ordinances? In other words, were they doing something wrong under our laws? Were they doing something right under our laws?
No, they were following the, in terms of a law, I don't think so. In terms of the design guidelines, I think they were also following those as well. The issue for us is whether or not those design guidelines take into account the visual effect of this part of Los Gatos Boulevard and what the impact of that large building will be in that area.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none. So far I have one speaker card. Joe Piazza. Would you please come forward? And I'd like to remind anyone else who would like to speak on this item, please submit a card to the clerk. Thank you.
Thank you, Council, for allowing me to speak in front of you today. In my opinion, this is a bigger message about this potential approval of not just one new building. I want to share with you how supportive this applicant has been and his team to take in consideration with the count that you might not realize as well. The applicant is local and sincere. The applicant is a Los Gatos family raising boys in Los Gatos because of their belief in our Los Gatos public schools. The applicant is a family who has invested in multiple Los Gatos commercial buildings that are visually stunning and fully occupied. This is a Los Gatos family who has invested millions in abandoned historical homes and buildings in downtown Los Gatos. This is an applicant of a Los Gatos family who has invested and is responsible for the historical remodel and the cultural revival of the Los Gatos Theater. This project on Los Gatos Boulevard should be approved because it is now the third redesigned plan that completely satisfies every commercial requirement of the town of Los Gatos. Los Gatos Boulevard is the gateway of our great downtown, and I'm so pleased that the town council is approving plans to finally get rid of old car dealerships and old dilapidated empty buildings such as this that does not beautify our town and that does not generate the meaningful tax revenue for our town or our schools. The applicant of this building is a Los Gatos family that wants to send a message, and that message to other families and investors to live in our town, to enjoy our town, to educate our kids in our town, and invest financially in our town, and to be emotionally invested in our town. Please support this project just as the Planning Commission has supported it, and approve this project because it's the right thing to do. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Piazza. The next speaker is Gary. Oh, we have a question for you, Mr. Piazza.
Actually, I don't. I just wanted to check on our process here, because typically what we've done in the past is we have the appellant and then the applicant and then the public and then the rebuttal from both the appellant and the applicant. So we're doing a different process tonight.
We were just reviewing the policy, and the mayor has the discretion. The appellant typically gets the 10 minutes that was specified. When the applicant is not the appellant, then we have a policy that the mayor can give the applicant up to 5 minutes. And then the sequence of the orders of speakers does have the rebuttals at the end of the public comment.
Yeah, it's just how I remembered it in the past. So I just wanted to see how we were doing this tonight, so that the applicant can know whether or not they should be raising their hand. So could we clarify what we're doing?
So the next speaker card that I have is for Gary Colsat, who is the applicant, and I would give him 5 minutes.
Thank you for pointing that out. I was confused myself. Gary Colside, architect. I wanted to just point out a few things that were not shown in our in Mr. Smith's presentation. They, you know, put those up, Jackie. Zoom in on those. Okay. Perfect. So this is all part of your package. I don't know if they were clear that the photos that we presented, but I have the utmost confidence that our model, our computer model, and how we place it into these actual photographs is extremely accurate, and I think it's way more accurate than what the appellant has shown you. I also like our architecture better. No, yeah, I wouldn't want a building with no windows, but I think the architecture is compatible. I think I want to just address the compatibility issue. Not that I feel that the Smiths have shown that it's not compatible, but just to reiterate that this building is under 40% FAR. There are several buildings in the area that are in the 50 to 60% range. It's not like we're trying to overbuild on this property. We're looking for a normal return on this property. The building itself is 52 feet wide on a 100-foot wide lot. So it's not like we're going across the whole property with this building. It's half of the width of the lot. Something to consider. We are conforming to all of the Los Gatos commercial guidelines, as well as the Los Gatos plan, Los Gatos Boulevard plan. And these, we've shown these pictures just to help you further understand what it might look like. It's hard to visualize with story poles. It's hard to visualize with blank mass buildings. And I think that these do a pretty good job. The photo on the bottom, it shows what it would look like after the building is built. And you can see that we have incorporated the balconies that were requested by the Planning Commission into this model. And you can see how there's space above that. It gives you that air and that openness. So I don't buy the fact that we're creating a wall. And I appreciate the fact that we deliberated quite a bit with the Planning Commission. They really studied it, and I think they made the right decision. After 8 months of us working on this between the Planning Commission, the Planning Department, Engineering Department, the town's architect, so consultant twice, and really doing a great job in-house, I think, with the new design. I think it's something we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Questions for the speaker? Councilmember Persinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Kolstad, I would believe it was Commissioner O'Donnell who spent a good deal of time trying to determine what would be the consequence of creating a single row of parking at the on the boulevard elevation and moving the building back. And if I can paraphrase, he did not seem to be able to understand the rationale that you were using, and although he did vote in favor of the proposal, I do not think he voted in opposition. But could you help me and perhaps the rest of the council understand that particular issue? Because that seems to be the issue that was brought up by the appellants.
Maybe I could break it down. A parking space is 20 feet deep. In order to provide access and backup and all that, you need another 25 feet. These are minimum standards. So that's 45 feet. Where we have our building is on our front setback of 15 feet. If we were to place parking into the front of this building, it would move the building back by 45 feet. It would put it back to where the existing building is right now. That's 25 feet of paving. That's with a landscape buffer, which is required by the town commercial guidelines. So you're talking about moving this back a minimum of 45 feet in order to get parking in the front. Now, by moving this building back 45 feet, now where do we make up that square footage? Now we have to push it all the way into the back and to the left. We've already done lots of studies on massings and how to get this square footage to work. And we're really still only talking about 39% FAR. We would push it all the way. We'd have to force our building upstairs, second story, all the way to the northern property line, which would give it a 2-story facade along the neighboring property that's behind the Smiths. I don't know, is that clear?
Yeah, it's clear. It's clear. I guess the question raised by Commissioner O'Donnell and maybe one of the others was, so why can't you do that? What would you have to change in your building to make that happen? How would you accommodate the parking requirements if you were to attempt to create this frontage buffer? What would you be willing to do to accommodate that particular issue?
We feel that this building, by moving it back 45 feet, in order to, I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Yeah, if you were to do this, what would change in your building structure?
Right,
Okay.
well, we would have to build to the back. And you have to understand this lot is extremely constrictive. There's a 24-foot easement that goes 3/4 of the depth of the property on the left-hand side, on the north-hand side. We have residential properties to the south, which means a minimum of a 20-foot setback on that side. So already we've lost 44 feet of a 100-foot wide lot. Now, we also have a 20-foot setback to the rear because, again, we're adjacent to another residential property. So now you're pushing the building back 45 feet. You're already squeezed 24 feet, 20 feet, and 20 feet. That doesn't give us much room at all to put this building. So that's why we're pushing it to just bulging out around the edges. And we felt that in previous iterations with the town's architectural consultant, we had actually reduced the depth of the building. It was back to the 20-foot rear setback, and that was one thing he advised against, and so we had pulled it 25 feet off of that, so we're 45 feet from the rear setback, where we were 20.
We'll continue with your questions.
And this is the last piece. I would assume embedded in the question that the commissioners asked was, how would you reduce the size of your building to accommodate this particular issue? And had that been evaluated by you and your team?
It would actually reduce it to the point where it'd be marginal and maybe not, honestly, maybe not something that they would move forward with. We had initial projections of 34 parking spaces, and when we started working with staff and the realities of adding extra buffer landscape around the side and the rear parking, we lost parking spaces because of that. So we were down to 30 parking spaces, and when we had a target of 34 to 36. So the client is really needs this 7,000 square feet.
Vice Mayor?
That was my question regarding the square footage, because it seems to me that you couched your answer in, to get the square footage, we would have to do X, Y, Z. And what I'm hearing you say now is you're not willing to reduce the square footage. Presumably, a smaller building would have less parking requirement. But am I hearing you say we're not willing to reduce the square footage?
That's the direction I've been giving, that they're not willing to reduce the square footage. Yeah. They don't understand why, with other buildings in the area that are over 40%, that are 50 to 60% FAR, that, and with less setbacks, the Yoga Source building, for example, 15-foot setback, 66% FAR. So he's looking around going, why is this not compatible? We're way under the height, we're way under the FAR, and we have a better looking building.
Councilmember Spector?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me start out by saying I appreciate the fact that your building complies technically with the town's paperwork, and I think the Planning Commission, from having listened to them, they appreciated that too. Having said that, if you just look at your building, I noticed that in your the photos that you put up, you tend to take a photograph from an angle, which gives trees. But if you look at one of your drawings here and you just look at the building straight on, and if you're just standing in the street in front of it, it seems big and it seems empty, devoid of trees or anything like that. And so because of that, it seems massive. But having said that, and understanding that you may not be mandated to put parking in the front, would it be possible for you to move the building back? I understand that you may have to get some variation on the setbacks in the back, but could you move the building back, put some greenery and maybe parking spaces in the front, and get square footage that is approximate to what you would like?
Well, again, the problem is trying to get square footage and parking into the front. It's very difficult to put parking spaces in there without having a real parking lot. You can't drive over landscaping, so we need the landscape buffer. So now to get the parking, we're really talking about moving it 45 feet. It's not just simply moving it 10, 15, 20 feet. It's 45 feet. So it's extreme.
Yeah, let me try and understand this. I come in on your driveway, and I know it's an easement, the driveway on the north side of your property. All right, let's say you had your landscape buffer, and then you have your parking area. So my car passes your landscape buffer, and then it turns right, and it goes into the parking area. So now there's my car, there's your parking area. Where's the problem I'm running into parking there?
Okay, so you're talking about doing perpendicular spots to our easement and our driveway. So we looked at that. What it would do would be to shrink the width of the building down to something that's about 20 feet wide. And it is very, makes the building look, it's a very narrow building. So we're trying to make this building look like a respectable building. And we were concerned about the architecture of having just a little portion of it sticking out at 20, 25 feet wide to get parking spaces that are perpendicular to the driveway.
How wide is your building as proposed?
52 feet.
All right, and I guess I'm not explaining myself. I was thinking that you could have parking as you turn right, you're in front of your building. I was thinking you could have parking in front of your building. Is that what you mean when you talk about the perpendicular?
No. Parking in front of the building, the only way to get in there is to have a 25-foot wide driveway to get into your parking space, and then to pull out, to back out, and then come back out.
Okay, thank
you. So that's where it gets extremely difficult, is to try to fit 45 feet of parking, of 25 feet of a driveway, to pull in off of the easement. You pull in, turn right into a driveway, and then you turn left into these parking spaces that would you would pull right in front of the building. That's 20 feet for a parking space and 25 feet of that driveway to pull in.
I'm sure you looked at the buildings off of the boulevard. If you're going north, the ones on the left.
Yes.
And I understand that they have parking in the back when you go down the hill, but forget that parking. Just looking at the parking that they have in front of the building, does that parking have the measurements that you're describing?
It does
now?
indeed. Yes, it does.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Mr. Colstad, I think you said, and I just want to make sure that the existing building is at 45 feet back?
Approximately.
Okay, thanks.
60 feet from the property, 45 feet from the setback. Yeah.
Further questions? Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yes, thank you for engaging us in this discussion. I think the applicant, or rather the appellant, was talking about the continuity of setbacks along the boulevard. Wasn't really talking about parking. And we have inserted this issue of parking as the planning commissioners were concerned. What about just not looking at the parking, looking at a more extended setback to accommodate a boulevard continuity that might be more appropriate to the rest of the buildings, south of your property along that side of the boulevard, and not consider the parking issue? Could you still, with a degree of continued setback from the boulevard, could you still maintain the square footages that you're looking for and our required parking on site?
First of all, I think that there's a lot of buildings on the boulevard that do meet that are really close to the street, and it's very difficult to actually judge what the setback is, because sometimes there's road dedications that it looks like there's a greater setback right now, but when Los Gatos Boulevard, or if it ever gets developed all the way, you will see that most of these buildings have 15 to 20 foot setbacks. However, right now we are so squeaked in there that if we move it 1 foot, we lose 2 parking spaces. So we move it 1 foot, we have to move it 8.5 feet. We can move it 8.5 feet and we would lose 2 parking spaces. That means we lose 470 square feet of the building. So now we're down to about 6,500 square feet by moving it 8.5 feet.
Okay.
I don't know if that's something that is palatable to everybody, but that's what happens. If you move it 1 inch, you move it 8 feet, and we lose 2 spaces.
All right, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Mr. Colstad, I think that your original design had parking under the building. Is that an option?
This proposal does have parking under the building.
Okay, and your original proposal had more parking under the building, correct?
Yes, but it also had a different configuration.
No, I understand that, but
Yes.
it was the square footage you wanted, but it had parking under the building, and it was farther, it was 1 story and then 2 story setback?
What we had done was we had taken the 2nd story and set it back over the whole parking area, and that's where it was back to 20 feet from the rear setback. And what we did is we compressed everything by pulling the 2nd story back over, stacking it over the front to create a 2-story building in the front. Yes.
So is
We
underground...
always had parking, and we did before, and we do still have park. I'm sorry.
Is more underground parking an option?
No.
Why not?
We have a very minimum amount of footprint right now as it stands, and I call it footprint because it's the majority of the building is on the 2nd floor. We have a very minimal 1st floor. What has a staircase. It's got a little lobby. It's got an elevator. It's got some restrooms. It's got 2 small offices. So if you start to lose that downstairs, it basically you might as well put almost the entire building on a second floor, which is really not something that's desirable. I don't think architecturally, I don't think from a marketing standpoint, from a usability standpoint. Certainly that's something that Mr. Cannon, the architectural consultant from the town, hammered us on. And so this is in response to all of those considerations. We would like more on the ground, but we don't have the footprint. We don't have the availability because of all the setbacks and the easements to put any more on the ground.
Councilmember Spector.
I'm going to circle back to this, seeing if we can push this back from the boulevard. Now, I'm going to tell you that I can appreciate when you say that right now the boulevard has all different types of setbacks. We have some new buildings, we have some old buildings, we have the yoga source, and so we don't have uniformity or conformity along the boulevard now. It's definitely in transition, so I appreciate that. Now, let's get to your building. What would be the challenge to you, if any, of pushing the building back from the boulevard, putting more, let's say, greenery, for lack of a better term, in front of it, not putting parking spaces? Let's start with that question. What's the challenge there, if any?
By moving the building back, since the parking is underneath the building, when we move the facade and the footprint, the first floor of the building back, we eat up into the parking space. So that's the incredibly difficult challenge that we keep facing. Trust me, we've looked at this so many times. We're trying to make this work for everybody, and it's very difficult. It's almost impossible. It is impossible to move it back without losing parking.
And would your answer be the same if you were able to push the building back into what is currently the required setbacks, residential setbacks, on the east side of your lot?
That would give us more room. We weren't even considering a variance on setbacks or anything. That would require a variance.
Okay. All right, thank you.
As I understand it, right?
Well, I'm not a variance fan, but
I'm not a variance fan either.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
This is probably a question for staff, but don't go away. The building behind this property is a residential building, but it's in a commercial zone. Is that not correct?
Behind the site is R1 zoned. It's part of the church, but it has an R1 zone, so it does have a residential zoning.
Okay. Just need to clarify that. Thank you.
I believe it's a storage building. For the church.
I mean, this is the residence that's on Shannon Road.
Oh, okay, that's to the left. That's a side property line where the residence on Shannon comes in on the side property line. Yes, so there's that one is zoned R1 as well. And then the R1 zone wraps the property along the rear and along the south side.
All right, thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Colsatt? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Helen Pastorino.
Good evening. My name is Helen Pastorino, and I've been a resident of Los Gatos since 1987. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I've had the opportunity to personally and professionally work with this applicant, as well as over the last 20-some years participate in many of the buildings that have been remodeled or built in Los Gatos. And I just want to personally share that I have never experienced this applicant to be opportunistic. In fact, I found him to be exactly the opposite in all that he builds and all that he does. And I would look to emulate the way he introduces his buildings and his space into the town of Los Gatos. I have found him to be most concerned about the aesthetic and the way that the occupants of Los Gatos and the members of this community view his buildings and his designs. So I'm here to support the applicant and encourage your approval of this building. If it's not this applicant, I think you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who will be as cooperative with this particular parcel and the challenges that it would face someone who is in fact not as opportunistic as I have seen other developers. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Robert Burba.
Good evening. Thank you, Council. I too here am to support the applicant. As Helen said, both she and I have known this family, as well as the professional side of Fox Creek Fund for over 15 years, and have been involved in different projects on many different levels with them. And I think, not to reiterate too much, but you would be very hard-pressed to find a party that is more cooperative, more open to trying to find a solution to a problem, and really concerned with the end product fitting in and being appropriate for the space that it's in. The aesthetics are paramount. This party would like nothing less than to come in and put in a brick in an area that doesn't need a brick. As far as the facades and the setbacks on Los Gatos Boulevard, given the images that I've seen here this evening, I don't think that this is anything that's untoward or would be just a sore thumb sticking out. If anything, I think the efforts would be made to make it as attractive as possible. The idea of the pull-in parking on the front, as we have seen on Los Gatos Boulevard north of Lark, to me would be incredibly inconsistent with the nature and the feel of that section of Los Gatos Boulevard. That still feels more like a place where there's office buildings mixed in with single-family homes. And whereas that section north of Lark, on the left-hand side heading north, looks nothing to me more than like a dressed-up sort of industrial park. Very inconsistent with what I'm hearing is the concern here. So I don't know the specifics on the setbacks, and I feel like the focus may have been lost on the sort of the impression that they're trying to squeeze every last square foot out of this building. No, I don't think that's the case at all. I think they're trying to make a viable investment in a community in which they live in, participate in, and want to continue to do so for many, many years to come. With that said, I think the other idea here is that this gentleman already had a 6-to-1 vote in favor of his plans. He worked diligently to make this project viable to the Planning Commission. I understand there's a process and a need for people who have concerns about things that have been approved. I get that. But the idea of entering into conversations at this stage of the game of, hey, well, maybe we just push the building back, or we go to tuck under parking, or those seem to be a little incongruent with how did we get this far in supporting this gentleman's project only to go back to base level questions of configuration, size, and use. So with that said, again, thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts. Again, I think you have an excellent applicant here who would do nothing but bend over backwards to try and make this work for all parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burba. So at this time, I have no more speaker cards from the public, but I would like to invite the appellant back up. You have 5 minutes to answer to any of the questions that were raised during the hearing.
Yes, I met Mr. Kolstad, and he's a really nice gentleman. I haven't met the applicant, but I'm sure he's a really nice person as well. This photograph here shows our building if it was moved to the street. And then it brings it back to the church property, which all of those buildings or all of those properties, if they were moved to with 15-foot setbacks, and you can see the cumulative effect of what that will do in that area. It will be a row of very big buildings down to Shannon Road. I don't know that, maybe I'm missing something, but I don't think the economic viewpoint about this building is what we're talking about. I don't think that's an issue, and they keep bringing it up. And I didn't understand that that was residential behind. We thought it was commercial, and it is the parking lot of the church. So I don't think that necessarily, is an issue as far as we're concerned, because they can move the building back. Here is what we think, based upon what we had shown you previously, or talked about previously, and this is the frontage driveways effect. And so it does meet the setbacks up in front, and in terms of the backside, if they move the building back to the setback, would be right where you can see that line back there and where the parking is. So it's feasible to do it this way, and this is how we think it could happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions for the speaker? Seeing none, I'd like to close the public hearing and invite the council for discussion or a motion.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Larson. Would the applicant like to come forward, and do you have anything else to share with us?
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And Mr. Mayor, in light of this new information that was shown to us, it's extremely difficult to review something in 30 seconds that we've been working on for about 9 months to a year. But the one obvious thing that stood out to me was that there's no landscape buffer behind hiding the parking. And so that's what we're always trying to work with, is the landscaping, which is pretty paramount and up and down the ordinance. I mean, we're even putting in landscaping in the back to screen our cars from the fence. So I don't see how you cannot have landscaping in the front of this property. So I don't, my first sense of that site plan is not realistic at all as far as getting approval in this town. If I came into you with that plan, I think you guys would laugh at me. The other thing I wanted to point out is that if you're looking into the future, what the corner building eventually will be, it's going to be rebuilt. It needs to be rebuilt. It needs new life. And the Los Gatos Commercial Design Guidelines call for projects located on corner parcels at signalized intersections should be on the corner, and it should be limited to 1 story. So you're not going to have this 2-story wall that was proposed here. I doubt, if you will, approve a 2-story building there. But I could see a nice, well-designed 1-story building, which has got a great corner feature. It's very visible. And their parking lot would basically flip over from their building now. They basically would take their parking in their building and flip it. And their parking lot would work seamlessly with the easement that's on our property, just like it does now. It would actually work better in the future because you would get their entrance and exit from Shannon Road way farther from the corner, which would be more in keeping with what traffic studies and traffic design engineers want. And now you're going to have this new building that's stuck out here, and you're asking us to move our building back, and now you're going to have an inconsistency of setbacks. So I don't know if you want to plan for the future on this, or you want to plan for the past, or you want to look at it as what it is today, but that's up to you.
Questions for Mr. Kolstad? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Now the public hearing is closed, and I'd like to look to the council for discussion or motion on this. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not prepared to make a motion, but I wanted to share some thoughts and see where the council was going to go. And Mr. Kolstad, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about planning. We don't plan for people, and we don't plan land use, hopefully, for economics. We do try to look to the future, and in that regard, the Los Gatos Boulevard plan is now 16 years old. The Planning Commission has been asking for it to be updated for almost 16 years, but a number of years. And in fact, it's been observed more in the breach than in the compliance recently. Laurel Muse was a commercial property that was allowed to convert to residential, and unfortunately this applicant is coming in behind it. And you're also coming in behind Swanson Ford, and you're coming in behind other developments that are impacting a 3-block area of Los Gatos Boulevard that we, or at least I, have to consider. So it's a cumulative impact. I looked at the Los Gatos Boulevard plan to see if it had anything about putting the parking in the front, and in fact it doesn't. It does talk about pedestrian friendly, but it doesn't require parking behind the building. Interestingly, one of the things it does say is that uses on Los Gatos Boulevard south of Shannon Road shall be residential or office. Existing non-residential uses which you have shall not be intensified. So if you take a vacant office building that's lesser square feet and make it greater square feet, I think that's intensifying it. So I think that's one thing that's actually not in compliance with the Boulevard plan. Where the parking comes from is the commercial design guidelines. And if you look at the basic design principles, one of the principles is that projects will maintain a strong landscape setback along street edges and will seek to create visual continuity along the street front. So when the Smiths are talking about visual continuity, it is in fact in the commercial design guidelines, and it's not something that I saw that was considered by Mr. Cannon so much as the intricacies of the building design. It also indicates that views of the surrounding hillside should be maintained. I think that you do end up with a perceived effect of a wall, especially with all the construction that's going on in that area right now, and especially with Laurel Mews being fronted up onto the boulevard. It also indicates the project shall be designed to meet their functional needs, but will be expected to reflect Los Gatos' unique qualities of small scale in the transitional area from north to south to residential, from commercial to residential where you are. I think that's particularly important. I did find parking in the commercial design guidelines, and it indicates that parking lots should be located behind or to the side of buildings facing Los Gatos Boulevard whenever possible. So if we look at impacts cumulatively, then one might look at another section of the parking which says the exception to the guide would be for projects that would block significant views to the surrounding hills if designed with buildings close to Los Gatos Boulevard frontage. It does indicate hills, but I think that just the perspective and the visual perspective from the Los Gatos Boulevard plan and from the point of view of a resident, and we haven't really talked about traffic, but the impact in that area is huge with the other construction, with the school across the street. And the church actually does have a frontage road, if you will, in front of the large church area. So it appears to be farther back. The Laurel Mews is not, it did its planned development. It was allowed to do what it did. It does create a wall, and that with Swanson Ford, I think, creates a cumulative impact that, at least to me, is not something that I would like to see get built there. I don't think it's appropriate to deny your project, and I think the Planning Commission did look at the setbacks quite a bit, as Councilmember Persinski said. Commissioner O'Donnell spent a lot of time talking about setbacks. I don't think the Commission looked at all aspects of the Los Gatos Boulevard plan and all aspects of the commercial design guidelines cumulatively. So I think it's fair to say, with our very strict appellate procedure, that this is an issue where the town council has more discretion over how to deal with those policies of the particular guidelines and plans than the Planning Commission did. And though I never want to say the Planning Commission erred, I could say that perhaps they didn't adequately consider the visual impacts, although they did in their discussion with Commissioner O'Donnell. So that's kind of where I am. I'm on a path toward trying to have the applicant, and I appreciate Mr. Berber's comments that he's the most compliant person I could find, so I'm going to count on that, and encourage members of the council to think about returning it to Planning Commission to look at either a step-back building, a reduced size building, or certainly an increased setback building.
Further discussion? Nobody? Seeing none? Motion?
All right, if nobody's going to talk, my motion would be to adopt our second option on page 2 of our staff report, which would be to grant the appeal and remand the application to the Planning Commission with specific direction to increase the setback, to consider reducing the square footage, and/or to consider a step-back building with a one-story fronting the boulevard and a two-story behind, but my quite specific direction would be to increase the setback so that the visual continuity is maintained and that the transition from north to south, as indicated we should be doing in the Los Gatos Boulevard plan in that particular area, and in particular south of Shannon, is maintained.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second? Do we have any further discussion? Do we have any further motions? Councilmember Spector?
I'm going to second the motion. I am struggling with this one because I really don't think, I don't think the Planning Commission did anything that was not consistent with our plans, policies, and so forth. The challenge I've been having is that given that I don't think they did anything outside the scope of our directives, I just think the building gives the appearance of being too massive because it's so close to the boulevard. So I like the idea of increasing the setback. I like the idea of considering a reduction in the square footage. I would also like to add to the motion that if this goes back to the Planning Commission, that the staff include in any staff report to the Planning Commission the issues raised by the Vice Mayor relating to the boulevard plans, the, the commercial guidelines, to give the Planning Commission a fuller picture within which to work.
Does the maker of the motion accept those changes?
Yes.
So we have a motion, we have a second. Do we have further discussion? Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't be supporting the motion. I've been listening very carefully to this, and with the guideline that we would need to find that the Planning Commission disregarded the Boulevard Plan or the commercial design guides, or in some other ways made a mistake. And when I read through the transcript of the Planning Commission, it was a robust discussion, and they had a lot of those issues. So I don't think that we can say that that happened. Now, you cannot like the Boulevard Plan, or you might not like that the general plan allows residential south of Roberts, which is why Laurel Muse is there, but it is what it is. And so I am not seeing any evidence that would in any way persuade me to overturn a 6-1 vote of the Planning Commission. So I can't support the motion.
Further discussion, Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do think that the Planning Commission did a really good job, and I think that they completely vetted the proposal. This is a real proposal that tried to accommodate the restrictions within which we develop our community. And as I look at the Boulevard Plan, it makes it very clear that there's a transition that is occurring from Roberts and Shannon southbound. And that is, we're moving into residential office, or we're moving away from commercial. And I think it's clear that we're doing that in our approvals. Nobody here at the dais, nobody previously at the dais was excited about the auto dealerships going away, but they did. And now we're in the process of doing a restructuring of those properties that, if you look at what was there, certainly vacant auto dealerships is not a contributor to the beauty of the community. No one would, I'm sure, in this community say, I really wish we had those vacant lots with the derelicts, blocks of buildings sitting there. It's not attractive. It's not an enhancement to the community. Things have to change, and I think what we see as the evolution as being proposed here is, I think, in great measure, a very attractive, a very appropriate addition to that particular area. I'm concerned about the setback. I'm concerned about the possibility of our becoming too close to the boulevard at that spot. I would be not unwilling to consider a variance in that 20-foot rear setback because, if the building could be moved back and we could gain some space in front, as I think of it now, I'm not interested in parking in front. I don't think that's a contributor to what the Boulevard Plan is attempting to say, but I do think that there may be some ability to move this project along with some creativity. I'm not necessarily interested in our going to a totally new architecture. I think the architecture has evolved appropriately. I commend the applicant. I commend our consulting architect for the work that was done, because I saw the previous and I see the current, and with the Planning Commission's addition of the balcony features in the second story, I think it's a great contributor. Going away from the metal roof to the tile, a great contributor. So lots of people have contributed in an appropriate way here. I would think that we have to be cautious about a complete redesign, be cautious about reduction of the square footage, but I would like to see some degree of accommodation for further setback on the boulevard, excluding the parking, because that, I think, would be appropriate to what we're going to see in the future. If you look at those two houses that are on the church property south of the building, they're not going to be here forever. It's not like that's the neighborhood that we're going to see in 20 years. So I'm open to some degree of accommodation for the fact that that's not really the neighborhood that it's going to be. We're projecting a neighborhood that could be. And so for my purposes, I cannot see exactly how there's been an error on the part of the Planning Commission. I do believe that some of the information that we heard tonight was vetted at the Planning Commission. I am having difficulty determining what, therefore, is the basis upon which we make a conclusion to resubmit. But my orientation is to ask for one more shot, working primarily with staff at the front end, to see what we can do before we move beyond this to anything different. But I would really encourage that what happens at this point is that we look for some accommodation of this front setback, and maybe that could be handled very easily without having to do a lot more processing. So that's my position at this point. I'm curious where the rest of the council members are. I think I hear where two are at this point.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. You might hear about two again. I agree. The applicant has done a lot of work on this project. I do not anticipate that there will be a architectural change or major architectural change. I do not anticipate that. I do anticipate that the building will be moved back. I would hope that the new information that the Planning Commission didn't have, and which I think they should have had, is more detail as to what is not only in the Boulevard Plan, but in the commercial guidelines. Although I do not like variances, this is one time where I might see the building going back into the setbacks to the rear of the building on the east side. So basically, I agree with both Ms. Jensen and Mr. Przinski. And as I said, I do not see this going back to the Planning Commission for major work. And I agree that we're not going to see the little buildings to the immediate south staying that way. And I know we're not going to see the property on the corner to the immediate north stay that way. I get that. But I think the Planning Commission will get that too.
Vice Mayor.
As the maker of the motion, I agree with Councilwoman Spector. In making the motion, I didn't anticipate a major architectural change, which is why I use the words consider. I am looking for in the motion an increased setback, and I think we've heard that a lot. I would add to my motion, and I hear the seconder, I think, agreeing to this, that a variance to move the rear setback back could be considered when it goes back to Planning Commission. So I think there are solutions, and in addressing the question of, is there new information, was there error, abuse of discretion? There wasn't abuse of discretion. Was there error? No, not per se. Was there an issue or a policy over which the Planning Commission didn't have discretion to modify or address, but which the council can? I think so, because I think the council ultimately is going to determine how to interpret the policies, which part of the policy is important, which part of the policy is not important, what we should be considering. And I think that in making the motion, we've given direction to the staff to give new information to the Planning Commission, which they can consider. So that's how I know that I'm very adamant about following our rules about when we can overturn the Planning Commission. And I think that this is one where we can say that there is additional information, that while there's not an error or abuse of discretion, perhaps there is policy considerations that the Planning Commission could not take into account that the council can. And by making the motion, I'm trying to give the Planning Commission the opportunity to consider those things and come up with a decision that hopefully will be acceptable to everyone.
Any further discussion? Mr. Larson.
Yes, just wanted to clarify one point. For the variance that the applicant may consider, we'll work with the applicant to see if it's possible to meet the state findings for a variance. It's not simply a local discretion. There's explicit findings that have to be made, and we'll pursue that with the applicant.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments, discussion? Seeing none, then we have a motion. We have a second. I'm going to call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Passes 4-1. Moving on to our next item, other business. Council discussion of moving the regular town council meeting days from Monday to Tuesday. We have a staff report by the assistant town manager.
Yes, thank you. The mayor requested that this matter be brought forward for council discussion. The staff report includes a list of days on which other cities in Santa Clara County have their council meetings, and a majority of those do have the council meetings on Tuesdays. The staff report also includes a list of advantages and disadvantages that staff could identify to moving the meetings from Monday to Tuesday. The council may be aware of others on either side that staff did not identify. If the council would like to move the meetings from Mondays to Tuesdays, we would ask for direction as to when that would occur, with the suggestions that that be either in the new fiscal year with your first meetings in August, or in the calendar year of January 2015. We'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So when I asked to put this on the agenda, I was thinking of the calendar year 2015. That would be my preference. I also thought of those holidays such as Memorial Day weekend, Labor Day weekend. Help me out. Is there any others that affect us on Tuesday? President's Day weekend. I know there's one coming up. And I thought about how we end up having those meetings on Tuesdays. Anyway, I also thought about in the past year when we were changing some policies about when constituents bring in their, when they turn in their correspondence to us before our meetings and the deadlines and the cutoffs, how that impacts their lives. They have to get it to us by is it Monday morning at 7 a.m., I think. And I just thought that was difficult for a lot of people. I also thought that it would give staff more time to prepare for the meetings. And then there's always the old Mondays, Mondays and Friday thing. So I thought, you know, the advantages in the staff report are something that could be considered by the rest of the council at this time. If the council, most of us on this dais have been up here for quite a while and have always been used to the Monday meeting schedule. But moving forward in 2015, if they could find some basis to change to Tuesdays, I think there's advantages to doing that, and that's why I agendized it. So we're looking for discussion on this. Is that Vice Mayor?
Being new, I'm not invested in Monday, and if Tuesday works for everybody, I'm happy to do that. I think it does create an advantage to members of the public to actually get documents and work on them, not taking their weekend time to do that and get that information to staff and in turn to council. So that's the biggest advantage that I see.
Further discussion? So I'll go ahead and make a motion that starting in 2015, I'd like to see council meetings move to Tuesday.
I'll second it so we have a vote.
Motion and a second. Discussion.
Yes. So I guess the only reason for Mondays is that it's been our tradition for 100 years, something like that. I know during my 16, that's what it's been. Previously, that's what it's been. I don't see any objection to the mayor's request. I don't see a problem really that's being solved, but if it's the council majority interest in, of course, it's a year plus away. That buffers it somewhat, but I guess tradition really is the only accommodation, and if that really doesn't mean anything or is not an issue, then I see nothing to object to.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I like the tradition of the Monday, but I agree with Mr. Przinski. That's not a strong reason to stick with Monday. I actually can't remember where the policy committee is in its process, but a Tuesday will definitely help with the public's timing of getting documentation and computer things to us in a timely fashion. So that probably is the best reason to support the motion.
Further discussion. So thank you for your comments, and I do respect the traditions, but as we move forward in time, I think with respect to Councilmember Spector's comments and you know, you look at the way times have changed and the way we've had our meeting schedules, and I just think that the workflow would be better improved. So therefore, if there's no further discussion, I'll call the question. Oh, Vice Mayor.
I was just going to make another observation that if we are going to move to digital packets, it may be easier actually to be able to transfer things onto a computer if we have it on a Tuesday, and so that staff has that Monday available to do that, rather than printing out desk items, et cetera, for us over the weekend. So that's another, and I do respect the tradition because my mental calendar has been quite messed up, being used to meeting on Wednesday and meeting on Monday instead. So Tuesday would be a nice compromise for me.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimously.
And Mr. Mayor, the implementation of your direction will be the council approves every June the regular meeting calendar for the next fiscal year. So when we bring that forward in June, we'll continue with the Monday meeting schedule through the end of the calendar year and start the new meeting schedule for January 2015.
Thank you. Town Attorney.
Although I might be speaking out of turn, I would state uncertainty that you have an ordinance also that states exactly when your regular sessions are held on the first and third Monday. So there'd actually have to be an ordinance change in your ordinance that should be there. But I can't say for sure what that number is. Yeah. We would have to bring back an ordinance change sometime during the year.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. And that concludes this evening's meeting. Thank you, everybody, for coming.